How's it going, guys? The Lore Overseer here, and welcome to the very first episode of the History and Lore. Admittedly, this took me a very long time to make, and this is just fucking part one of the freaking first episode. I know it kind of defeats the purpose of me making an episodic series. I'm about to divide them up into parts, but oh well. Anyway, for this one, I'll be covering the history of lore of Max Brooks' The Zombie Survival Guide and World War Z media that he wrote, and the adaptations that were created by Saber Interactive and Plan B Entertainment that was made from the video game and movie series based off of World War Z. I hope you guys enjoy this premiere episode and like for more comment. Let's get started. Something I wanted to add. This goes on more into the guidelines of this series. It's safe to assume that due to our limited knowledge and speculation of temporal stability of the vast multiverse, one of three things happen with the flow of time with any universe, including our own. The flow of time is in a loop. It begins when the universe is created and resets back when it reaches the end of a story. In this case, 2003 for the Zombie Survival Guide, or 2006 with the World War Z book. You get the idea. Or the second thing that could happen was the flow of time just resumes as normal as it should. Like, say for example, everything just ends after a story ends and the world just continues on as how it was to begin with. Or three, the universe after it reaches the end point of a story just simply ceases to exist. That's probably it's probably the most depressing way to go out, where just knowing your existence is just going to end one day. You won't even know it. But, shit can happen. It's not exact science that we figured out yet. That's kind of just like my theory. But, we shall see how else it will go down. Naturally, we'll begin where it all started. We will start with the Zombie Survival Guide, which was written by Max Brooks. That was originally published in September 16th, 2003. With his follow-up publication being The World War Z, an oral history of the zombie war, being published September 12th, 2006, almost exactly 3 years after he released his first book. Now, it's pretty clear from what I'm going to show you right now exactly how many... It clearly shows which book inspired more, media and spin-off. But the Zombie Survival Guide book and World War Z book is where it all started. If it wasn't for this motherfucker, these two wouldn't exist. Therefore, we wouldn't have that video game. We wouldn't have that trash mobile app. We wouldn't have that disappointment of a movie, and we wouldn't have that amazing comic book or amazing video game. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Alright, so a quick thing I want to clear up here. Although technically speaking, the mobile app and the video game are actually inspired from the movie, because it's confirmed by the developers that both these games take place in the same universe as World War Z, the movie anyway. So technically, it doesn't really inspire inspiration from the book. It inspires inspiration from the movie, but the app was discontinued in 2017. I played it myself. Trust me, you're not missing anything. And the video game, although it's set in the movie universe, the way events play out and how the story is told between various stories and nations, the way it's told borrows heavy inspiration from the book, which I really appreciate, because if it wasn't, that shit would have been trash. But yeah, so technically speaking, the movie inspired these two, but since the video game inspires more from the book, story-wise at least, it still works out. Yeah, pretty much. From what I can gather, let me just go here. So, here in the divergence. So, from my research, I can conclude that the Zombie Survival Guide timeline and the World War Z timeline are in the same universe, but they're in different timelines, just as I just said. um, it's pretty clear. I mean, the reason why I believe this, the reason why this is, I can prove this by noting that the virus and the point of interest, in the person of interest, I'm sorry, and have it both timelines but play different roles, somewhat. Well, at least the person of interest plays different roles. The virus is pretty much the same thing across both of them. So let's take a look at the virus itself. It's officially named the Solanum virus. Um, so the Solanum virus is a viral pathogen that can resurrect the dead into zombies. Pretty standard stuff if you know your zombie media. But here's the differences in both timelines. The virus in the Zombie Survival Guide timeline, which I will refer to this point as the RA timeline just for simplicity's sake, was the virus was first introduced in 60,000 BC. It's the reason why I know it was introduced at that point. I'll get to shortly. And the virus, the Solana virus, it was introduced in the World War Z timeline, to which this point onward I'll refer to as the War timeline, was introduced in approximately 1986. The reason why I say approximately 1986 and not just like exactly 1986 is because the book doesn't exactly state when all this started. This is basically off of speculation. This is my... I'm doing the best I can here. The book was released in 2006, so I can assume that current timeline is 2006. And the book states that it's been 20 years since the outbreak and 10 years since the war. So if you were just subtract 20 years from it, that's approximately when the virus started to spread around the world, and how events started to play into events that you see fit now. Okay. And the next person I want to talk about is Max Brooks himself. He's not just the author of these books, he actually self-inserted himself into these books as an actual character. He plays two different roles in the Zombie Survival Guide and the World War Z timeline. In the RA timeline, he's potentially a journalist or researcher writing the Survival Guide. I say potentially because the book never states who exactly is the author of this book. They always just like say like the author of this book. But considering that he wrote the book and it's his name on the book, and he just says the author of this book, naturally, it's only natural to assume that like he's the author. So, I think he's more of a journalist than a researcher, but I could be wrong. He's either one of those two. In the war timeline, he's a UN investigator interviewing various people with different backgrounds to chronicle the history of the zombie war. It is stated in the book that he is, this person, and he is, like a UN investigator. So that's how I know. We'll get into that in the next part when I cover World War Z, the book. And yeah, we shall continue. For this part, I'll be focusing on the RA timeline, as I stated before. From the very first known instance to the most recent concerning a zombie outbreak, these historical events are officially labeled as recorded attacks, in the book anyway. So, excuse me. So him and his team of researchers, I believe, in the RA timeline, they went around the globe gathering as much info as the virus as possible. And they came across like potential evidence of the historical attacks that happened because of the Solana virus and zombies attacks, hence recorded attacks. Now, most of them, especially the older ones, like way before, like in the BC, early AD era, medieval times, all the way up until like the early modern era, it's all mainly speculation because record keeping wasn't exactly very good back then. And especially the first attack, all they have is just a bunch of skulls and cave drawings. That's about it. Right. There's this, and that's how we will go over them shortly. But one thing I did want to talk about was there's a section in the zombie survival guide where Max Brooks puts different classifications of outbreaks in the book, um, that like state the severity of the attack and the potential of the outbreak itself. We'll go over that. We'll go over those, and I'll use these outbreak classes as like an additional like classification just for consistency. So here we are, the outbreak classes. So first of all, we got class one. Class one is a small scale outbreak. Zombie numbers can range from a single zombie to a small group, like 20, 30, somewhere around there, with human casualties ranging from very low to low numbers. Uh, More often than not, someone well known or very important goes missing. Doesn't really go missing from this. Um, that's about it. Outside attention, such as like media coverage or government intervention, will be practically non-existent because they don't really think this is very important. Most likely to due to them waving off the incident as a minor civil unrest, riot, industrial accident, animal attack, whatever, etc. Like they can practically come with any excuse because they just don't think that this is really important. And I mean, it's not that severe, so it's not really their fault for assuming that. They just think that, well, shit happens. Outbreak class duration could last from a few days to up to a week or two. Yeah. Class 1 outbreak doesn't really last that very long because usually whenever that happens, they're just dealt with pretty fast. And most of the time, the people involved in these outbreaks don't even realize that they're fighting zombies. So we have Class 2. Class 2 is a medium-scale outbreak, an epidemic that could happen within an urban or highly populated rural or suburban area. Zombie numbers can range from a sizable group to a group of hundreds, so like 50 to like 100 or 200 zombies. Human casualties can range from a few dozen to several hundred because most of them probably have either gotten eaten or turned to zombies. Outbreak duration can last just as long as a Class 1 outbreak, but can span a greater area than Class 1. And because of that, it can potentially last just a little bit longer than a Class 1 outbreak. Media coverage will most likely cover up the story or be heavily altered or censored to hide the truth. More often than not, however, most likely they'll like inaccurately report the situation as a local riot or something. Uh, and a combination of local and law enforcement will be dealing with the threat with the possibility of a National Guard stepping to assist should the outbreak area grow farther than be able to contain, or the situation just gets fucking out of control. Which leads us to Class 3. Class 3 is a large-scale outbreak epidemic that could happen in a large city or several miles in a densely populated urban areas. A zombie outbreak could reach the 100,000 mark, and human casualties could reach the millions. Areas affected by by this outbreak class will be in total chaos. A combination of riots, skirmishes of law enforcement, and National Guard combining the hordes of undead, and human bandits will make containment next to impossible. Still achievable, but that's be very difficult to do. And this class of outbreak can last from several months to probably a year or two until they can regain control of the epidemic. Media blackouts will most likely be instated, but be next to impossible to maintain, at least for very long, because this type of outbreak will leave too many survivors in undeniable experience and eyewitnesses, and the internet is fast with information. The government response will be extensive with the declaration of state of emergency, martial law to organize the madness, restricted travel options, federal services providing supplies, and tight security and coordination. This event could permanently change the area it affects in our aspects of life. Like, say, for example, say a Class 3 outbreak happened in New York City. people, I definitely would think that people involved in that outbreak would most likely not be dead. Like, I'm pretty sure a good chunk of the population would be either dead or a zombie at that point. And maybe some buildings would be probably be like destroyed beyond repair, or like just completely collapse of survivors trying to fight the infected. Finally, we got Class 4, also known as a doomsday outbreak, an apocalyptic scenario. This outbreak has spread to all corners of the globe. Containment has been off the table for a long time now, and world leaders are looking for ways to survive in this new world. World War Z would definitely fit a Class 4 outbreak, and we will see more when we get to that part, just exactly how world leaders deal with the outbreak at hand. Zombie populations will be in the billions and counting every day. Human population will continuously diminish until all humans outside the secure safe zones or those without survival skills will be food for the dead, for the undead, or victims for roaming bandits. Society has completely collapsed, and the old world is pretty much done at this point. The environmental food chain has permanently shifted from humans being the dominant species to one of the lowest. Cities and towns, once being the hotspot for human society for the world to continue, is now nothing but massive ossuaries continuously being roamed by hordes of undead, nothing more than a shell of the old world itself. It's an undead world out there. Right. Now, without further ado, let's get into the timeline of the Zombie Survival Guide by taking a look at all the historical events of the recorded attacks, starting with the BC era. Recorded attack number 1. Date of attack, 60,000 BC. Location of attack, Katanda, Central Africa. Outbreak class, unknown. Synopsis. A cave containing 13 human skulls and a large pile of fossilized ash of the bodies of said 13 humans, accompanied by a cave drawing of a human silhouette in a threatening pose and another human inside the mouth of the former, was discovered in the excavation of this cave. After laboratory results confirmed the nature of the ash and skulls, debates between schools of thoughts rages on the message of what the message is of the cave drawing. One side depicts it as a warning of the dangerous carnivorous nature of the undead, while the other depicts it as a method of disposal of the undead. A conclusion has yet to be reached. Recorded attack number 2. Date of attack, 3000 BC. Location of attack, modern day Nekhan, Egypt. Outbreak class, level 1. Synopsis. When British explorers uncovered a nondescript tomb in 1892, in the tomb was a partially decomposed corpse, walls mostly covered in scratch marks, and an open casket. The scratches on the walls matched those made by the human. With the corpse's hands being severely damaged by constant use and stress, it looks as though the corpse itself was trying to find or break its way out of the tomb. Bite marks around the right radius of the corpse matches those of human teeth. An autopsy of the corpse revealed that the brain contained traces of the Salon virus, making it the oldest known sample on record. Recorded attack number 3. Date of attack, 500 BC. Location of attack, Africa. Outbreak class, level 1. Synopsis. Around this time in history, Haino of the Carthage, during his journey, sent an expedition to an island seemingly off the coast of continental Africa. Said expedition was written in a sea log. On the shores of a great jungle, where green hills hide their crowns above the clouds, I dispatched an expedition inland in search of sweet water. Our soothsayers warned us against this action. In their eyes was a cursed land, a place of demons abandoned by the gods. I ignored their warnings and paid the highest price. Of the 35 men sent, 7 returned. The survivors saw the tale of monsters from the jungles, men with fangs and snakes, claws of leopards, and eye burning with the fires of hell. Bronze blades cut their flesh, but drew no blood. They feasted upon our sailors, their wails carried on the wind. Our soothsayers warned of the wounded survivors, claiming that they would bring sorrow on all they touched. We hastened to our ships, abandoning those poor souls to this land of man-beasts. May the gods forgive me. Despite his discredit of often inaccurately making discoveries and ignoring the obvious exaggerations, this log details of the man-beast closely resembling the living dead. Recorded attack number 4. Date of attack, 329 BC. Location of attack, Afghanistan. Outbreak class, unknown. Synopsis. When the Soviet Special Forces occupied an unknown Macedonian column built by Alexander the Great, a unit from the force discovered an ancient Hellenic army barracks 5 miles from the monument. Among many artifacts lied one in particular that could be linked to an ancient outbreak among the region at the time. A small bronze vase that detailed 3 drawings. 1. A man buying another. 2. The same man laying on his deathbed. 3. The victim rising again. And the picture cycles back to the first picture. This could be a vital clue into evidence of a zombie outbreak witnessed and or experienced by Alexander the Great or one of the local tribes of the region. Recorded attack number 5. Date of attack, 212 BC. Location of attack, China. Outbreak class, unknown. Synopsis. When the Emperor of the Qin dynasty ordered any and all books and documents not related to the practitioner concerns to be burnt to prevent evil thoughts. I guess he didn't want people becoming smarter than him. Therefore, any and all records of any zombie outbreaks is lost to history, with the exception of this medical piece of documentation. The only treatments for victims of the eternal waking nightmare is complete dismemberment followed by fire. The patient must be bodily restrained, his mouth filled with straw, then bound securely. All limbs and organs must be removed, avoiding contact with any bodily fluids. All must be burnt to ash, then scattered at least 12 li in all directions. No other remedies will suffice as the sickness has no cure. The desire for human meat is unquenchable. If victims are encountered in numbers with no hopes of restraining them, immediate decapitation must be used. The challenge spade be the swiftest weapon for this task. From the way this document was written, the doctors seem unaware that the victims were actually dead and were simply sick, though this note is enough evidence to suggest that they've encountered an outbreak of zombies before. Recorded attack number 6. Date of attack, to 121 AD. Location of attack, Furnan Concedi, Caledonia, modern day Scotland. Outbreak class, level 3. Synopsis. In the Roman land of Scotland, a zombie outbreak occurred, albeit due to unknown origin. The local barbarian chieftains believed the zombies to be people that have simply gone insane. Viewed them as easy targets, more than 3,000 warriors were sent to deal with them. Of the 3,000 warriors, 600 were completely devoured by the hordes. The remaining were transformed into the living dead due to their injuries. A merchant by the name of Sextus, who witnessed the Sextus Sempronius Tumburo, who witnessed the event and barely escaping, came to the commander of the nearby military garrison of the Roman army, Marcus Lucius Turntus. Tumburo reported his findings to the commander. The size of the horde headed their way. Although unaware of their nature, knew decapitation was the only true way of ending them. With only 480 men at his disposal and reinforcements not being able to make it in time, he devised a strategy to end the threat. He had workers dig 2 trenches and filled them with crud oil and spikes. When the horde arrived, a handful were walking right into the trenches where the narrow opening, while there was a narrow opening that led straight to the soldiers, where the majority of the zombies went to. After 9 hours of battle, it ended with a Roman victory. No zombies survived the battle. 150 Roman soldiers were killed. No wounded, as any big comrade were slain right there. This event led to the creation of Army Order number 37 for the Roman army. It's also suggested that this battle led to the creation of the Hadrian Walls. This is by far the largest outbreak on record, and if it weren't for the Roman tactics, this most likely would have turned into a Class 4 outbreak. This is the first instance of the presence of zombies actively creating and altering history. If it wasn't for the zombies in this world, Army Order number 37 most likely either would have not existed, or at least not exist in the way it is now. But since it happened, now they have an army order specifically designed for dealing with zombies. Recorded attacks number 7 and number 8. Dates of attacks 140 to 141 AD and 156 AD. Location of attacks Thumagadi, Numidaya, which is Algeria, modern day, and Castra Regina, Germania, which is modern day southern Germany. Class outbreaks level 2 and level 1. Synopsis. In the order stated above, 6 small outbreaks, which can be classified as an overall Class 2 outbreak, occur within close proximity to each other. Among nomads residing in the desert regions, these outbreaks were dealt with by 2 cohorts of the 3 Augustia Legionary base. 130 zombies were killed and 5 Romans were killed. A Roman army engineer wrote this in his private log. A local family remained in prison in their home for at least 12 days. Actually, let's restart that. A local family remained in prison in their home for at least 12 days, while the savage creatures scratched and clawed fruitlessly at their bolted doors and windows. After we dispatched the filth and rescued the family, their manner looked near to insane. As to what we could gather, the wails of the beast day by day, day after day, night after night, proved to be a merciless form of torture. This entry could hint as the first recorded instance of psychological damage caused by a zombie outbreak. More so, the constant noise of moans, grunts, and any groans and the screams of the undead non-stopped. About 15 years later, an attack on Germania of 17 zombies, a Class 1 outbreak, left a prominent cleric infected and eventually turning into a zombie. The Roman commander in charge of handling the outbreak orders his troops to destroy the former holy man, saying that he has turned. The local citizens were unaware of the situation and what happened to the cleric. They became enraged while misunderstanding the circumstances, which led to a riot. A total of 10 zombies were killed, 17 Roman soldiers were killed, and 198 citizens were killed from the ensuing riots. Recorded attack number 9. Dates of attack 177 AD. Location of attack nameless settlement near Tolsa, Alquintania, southwestern France. Outbreak class level 1. Synopsis. 21 years after a previous attack, the last recorded attack happening within Roman territory occurred within a nameless settlement within Alquintiana. This letter was salvaged, written by a merchant traveling who witnessed the event intended for his brother. He came from the wood, a man stinking of rot. His gray skin bore many wounds, from which flowed no blood. Upon seeing the screaming child, his body seemed to shake with excitement. His head turned to her direction. His mouth opened in a howling moan. Darius, and the old legionary veteran, approached, pushing the terrified mother aside. He grabbed the child with one arm and raised his Gladys around with the other. The creature's head fell to its feet and rolled downhill before the rest of the bawling followed. Darius insisted that they wear a leather covering as they pitched the body into the fire, the head still moving in a disgusting bite, was fed to the flames. This record is a clear indication of Roman soldiers' general attitude towards the undead. Cold, fearless, no superstition, just another problem requiring another solution. Right, hold on, is it actually? Okay, it is actually. How many times? 16 minutes already. We passed by the first 10. Now we move on to the medieval era. Recorded attack number 10. Date of attack 700 AD. Location of attack Frisiana, Northern Holland. Outbreak class unknown. Hypnosis. A painting was recently discovered in a museum of the vaults of the Rijksmuseum Museum in Amsterdam. It's hinted to have taken place around 700 AD. A description of the drawing is as follows: a collection of knights in full armor attacking a mob of ragged men with grey flesh, arrows, and other wounds covering their bodies, and blood dripping from their mouths. As the two forces clash at the center of the frame, knights bring down their swords to decapitate their enemies. 3 zombies are seen in the lower right-hand corner crouching over a body of a fallen knight. Some of his armor has been pulled off, one limb ripped from his body. The zombies feed on the exposed flesh. Since the painting has no signature or any clue that could trace back to whoever made it, it's unknown who made it or how it ended up at the museum. Recorded attack number 11. Date of attack 850 AD. Location of attack unknown provenance in Saxony, Northern Germany. Outbreak class level 3. Hypnosis. Although this outbreak didn't last as long as a class 3 outbreak normally would, the number of zombies and casualties are still quite alarming. An entry in Fafar Bernard's Conceal's diary during his pilgrimage to Rome tells of a story of a zombie outbreak. A zombie roaming out of a black forest built a local farmer, which in turn reanimated after dying and infecting his entire family. As a result, the infection spread to the entire village. Survivors fled into the Lord's castle. No one realized that among the survivors were been victims. As the outbreak spread farther, neighboring villages' inhabitants surrounded the infestation zone, led by a local clergy who believed this is a holy attack. The victims possessed by evil spirits, and holy water is the only way to save them. The naive quest ended in a massacre, with everyone either dead or turned into a zombie. Desperate, neighboring lords and their knights would take matters into their own hands by burning down every village and zombie within the 50-mile radius of the original infestation zone. No zombies nor humans survived the flames. The original Lord's castle was transformed into a prison of several hundred zombies after the affected survivors turned and killed everyone in the castle. Because the bridge was lifted and no survivors remained to lower it, the knights could not enter to exterminate the infected. For decades after the outbreak, people who passed by the castle would speculate the place to be haunted after hearing the moans and wails of trapped zombies. Recorded attack number 12. Date of attack 1073 AD. Location of attack Jerusalem. Outbreak class level 1. Hypnosis. This recorded attack is by far the most medically detailed record of the Solana virus and its effect on the host. Dr. Ibrahim Obadiah, one of the most important researchers in the zombie physiology, details the story of an unknown outbreak occurring near the city of Jaffa, Palestine. With the help of the local militia and a translated copy of Roman Army Order 37, they managed to stop the outbreak with minimal casualties. Dr. Obadiah managed to convince or bribe the militia to let an infected woman live with the close supervision to study the effects of the virus. The compromise included moving the infected woman and all of the doctor's lab equipment into the city jail and in a cell where she could be contained. The doctor made a number of discoveries as he watched the woman perish and reanimate. He discovered that all bodily functions ceased to function, all except for the brain, and managed to scientifically prove that despite the creatures being physically dead, it still functioned. After this breakthrough, he ventured through the Middle East to uncover other aspects of the virus and uncover any other potential outbreaks. His work included the entire physiology of the undead, including the nervous system, digestion, rate of decomposition, and the behavioral patterns of the undead. Despite this achievement, most of the crucial information would be lost to history as the Christian knights stormed Jerusalem, burning the majority of his work and beheaded him as a worshipper of Satan. His life story and parts of his work would survive the tides of time as his biographer, who was a Jewish historian and former colleague, kept his story alive. Recorded attack number 13. Date of attack 1253 AD. Location of attack Fiskerhorn, Greenland. Outbreak class Level 1 Subgnosis. During the Vikings' crusade and exploration of this area, the Icelandic chieftain Gunberhorn Lubbergat established a colony in Greenland to where he was in charge. One winter, he left the island back to Iceland to presumably resupply. After 5 years, he returned only to find the colony completely destroyed. Up to 3,000 skeletons were completely devoured and picked clean of any meat. The only inhabitants were 2 women and a child, who didn't respond to their calls and instead attacked them. They quickly dealt with the undead. After that encounter, they believed the entire expedition cursed and burned down any trace of the village and inhabitants. When he saw his family among the bodies, Lumbergat ordered his men to kill him as well. Fed his body to the flames. This recorded attack would be evidence as to why all Viking settlements suddenly vanished during this period, in Greenland at least. Recorded attack number 14. Date of attack 1281 AD. Location of attack China. Outbreak class not applicable. Subgnosis. Marco Polo recorded this entry during his adventures, notably his visit to Emperor Kublai Khan's summer place. The emperor displayed a severed zombie head in a jar full of clear liquid. The Khan, said to his grandfather, gained possession of it during his conquest of the West. Polo noted that the head tracked his every movement in the room, and when he reached out to the jar, the head snapped at his hand. The Khan lectured him for doing that and sharing a tale of a court official who did the same thing, being bitten, and who later died and returned to attack his fellow servants. Polo's record of this was never publicized due to the nature of the tale. The head was never recovered. It is believed that the head of the zombies was one of the original test subjects for Dr. Obadiah, making it the oldest zombie relics on record. Recorded attack number 15. Date of attack 1523 AD. Location of attack Oaxaca, Mexico. Outbreak class not applicable. Subgnosis. A Spanish priest by the name of Father Esteban Negron wrote a text in his viewpoint of the dead during his time as a priest. The names tell of a sickness that darkens the soul, causing a thirst for blood for their brothers. They tell of men, women, even children whose flesh had become gray with rot and possess an unholy smell. Once darkened, there is no method of healing, save death. This can only be achieved through fire. Since the body becomes resistant to all arms of man, I believe this tragedy to be a tragedy of the heathen. For without their knowledge, our Lord Jesus Christ, there is indeed no cure for this illness. Now that we've been blessed by the masses of the light and the truths of his love, we must strike to seek these darkened souls and cleanse them of all the forces of heaven. Some believe this is an attempt to suppress information of the nature of the threat or to pass it off as a hoax. Recorded attack number 16. Date of attack 1554 AD. Location of attack South America. Location outbreak class level 1. Subgnosis. When a Spanish expedition that was led by Commander Don Rafael Cordosa, entered and ventured into the Amazon jungle to discover the fabled city of gold, El Dorado. He and his expedition was warned by the Tubai guides to stay away from the area known as the Valley of Endless Sleep, where a race of creatures that moan like the wind and thirst for blood resided. Don believed that they fabricated these stories in order to hide where was I? I'm sorry. In order to hide the secrets or location of the lost city. Despite the pleas of his men to turn away from the horror stories, he pressed on. After dark has fallen, his party was attacked by the undead. The exact story of the attack is unknown. From a passenger manifest of a ship, the San Veronica, states that he was the only survivor to have reached the coast where the boat resided. After returning to Spain a full year later, Cardoza provided a full recount of the attack before the royal court of Madrid and the Holy Office in Rome. Believing him to have fabricated this to withhold the treasures from them, he was stripped away of his title and died in poverty. Now we go on to the early modern era. Recorded attack number 17. Date of attack 1579 AD. Location of attack the Central Pacific. Outbreak class level 1. Hypnosis. Francis Drake, a former pirate turned national hero, tells the tale of one of his resupply stops. The natives of an unnamed island warned him to not to venture into the nearby cay to which they claim resides the gods of the dead. It is ritual for the natives to send their sick, weak, and old to the cay to enter the afterlife. This caught Drake's attention and wanted a demonstration of the myths. He observed as a native delivered a dying old man to the shore as he watched in shock, and shambling figures slowly made their way into the old man, and they began to maul him to death. He was surprised as he watched the old man rise again and shamble to the claim after them. He kept this dark secret to the grave, only being discovered in his secret journal after his death. Researchers managed to find the island from the coordinates as he dubbed the Easel of the Damned. Recorded attack number 18. Date of attack 1583 AD. Location of attack Siberia. Outbreak class level 1. Hypnosis. A handful of 6 fucks with this one with a 6th sense of irony. A scouting party for the Khorasak Yermak became separated from the main force, wandering aimlessly for hours, starving and cold, until they came up upon a village inhabited by Asiatic tribe. They took in the troops and let them rest to recover their strength. The party repaid the villagers' kindness by declaring themselves as rulers of the village by force and settled down there for the winter until the main force arrived. After exhausting the village's resources, the party turned into cannibalizing the villagers themselves. Most of the villagers became food for the soldiers, with a few unlucky souls escaping into the winter. After quickly exhausting that food source, they turned into the village's graveyard, hoping to find fresh corpses to eat. They found a young woman gagged and tied up. They brought her to the fire to defrost. Once she awoken, they were amazed that she survived. When they went to kill her and strip her meat, she broke the gag and restraint and bit one of the soldiers. The rest of the party brutally chopped her up, cooked her meat, and ate it. Only 2 of the party refused to eat. The bitten man and a deeply superstitious religious man who believed the meat was cursed. Ironic, isn't it? He was proven right as he watched his comrade vomit from the food, and they all died. They all died that night, including the bitten soldier. When he awoke the next morning, he attempted to burn the bodies in the aftermath in the funeral pyre. The bitten comrade resurrected and chased the survivor into the forest and exposed the elements. The zombie froze solidly shortly after the chase began. The survivor was wandering for many days until he was found by the main force. His story was recorded by a Russian historian where it remained in archive until it was discovered in the modern day. This is, and so far, the only scientifically recorded instance of a zombie freezing in the cold. Recorded attack number 19. Date of attack 1587 AD. Location of attack Roanoke Island, North Carolina. Outbreak class level 1. Synopsis. The English colonists who inhabited the Roanoke colony, cut off from the support of Europe, sent hunting parties for food in the mainland. One of the parties disappeared for 3 weeks with only one survivor returning to tell what happened in the mainland. His party was attacked by a band of savages, their putrid wormwood skin impervious to gunpowder and shot, which led to the death of 5 of his men, 4 of which were mauled to death. They buried the bodies, but the bodies rose from the grave and ate the remainder of the party, save for him. The colony didn't believe his stories and branded him as a liar and a murderer. He was hanged shortly after for his unconfirmed crimes. It was only when another hunting party, was sent for the bodies, they returned in bites and scratch wounds. They told stories of savages that fit the now deceased hunter's description. After being examined, the wounded survivors died shortly after. They were buried, then rose again from the grave. Exactly what happened at this point on are very sketchy to this day, with about 3 conclusions to the town's sudden disappearance. One version of the story details that the inevitable destruction of the town from the outbreak, while another describes how the Native American tribe Croatan Nation realized the threat of the outbreak, therefore burned and killed everyone to prevent the outbreak's further spread. The third depiction has the same tribe rescue the uninfected survivors, burn all infected and zombies, take the survivors back to their home. As far as we know, the mystery of the town's disappearance will forever be unknown. Now, this is another instance of this virus changing history to a way it diverges from our own history. The real-life mystery of Roanoke Island and, the word Croatan, to this day in our world hasn't been figured out yet, as no traces left. Well, at least very little traces have been left to conclude why the town just suddenly disappeared. But here, at least we're given a good handful of solid evidence that this could have been the hands of an outbreak of zombies. Now, we still don't know, and ultimately what happened to the people who survived, or what happened to the survivors, or if anyone even survived the outbreak. But it's definitely not a reason to conclude that this is the reason why now how this is different from our own reality. Recorded attack number 20. Date of attack 1611 AD. Location of attack Edo, Japan. Outbreak class unknown. Synopsis. A Portuguese merchant by the name of Enrique de Silva shared the story of a priest shared with him while he was drunk. One of the father's servants who recently converted to their faith was a member of the secret order in Japan named the Brotherhood of Life. This order exists for the purpose of exterminating demons, for which are similarly described as zombies, and how they resurrect and feed on human flesh. The recruits are trained from youth in the arts of destruction. Their weapons of choice are oddly shaped oriental scimitars, but this could be in a historical accuracy. When the senior recruits make their final step towards ascension to an active member, their final test would be to spend an entire night in a room full of severed zombie heads in jars. Although he makes the inaccuracy that the heads constantly wail throughout the night, since the severed heads do not have the capacity to moan from lack of lungs and vocal cords. But regardless, this seems more of a psychological test to see if the recruits can handle the stress and pressure of many enemies seeking your death at any given moment. The merchant asks about the whereabouts of the servant to discuss the story further. The father delivered the news that he was found murdered a fortnight ago. The Brotherhood do not allow their secrets to be spilled, nor their members to renounce their allegiance. If this story is proven true despite the historical and scientific inaccuracies, this could explain why there are very few outbreaks in Japan and knowledge if the order was kept secret until the 20th century. Author's note, fortnight means 2 weeks, not the video game, okay? Recorded attack number 21. Date of attack, 1690 AD. Location of attack, the Southern Atlantic. Outbreak class, level 1. Subnosis. A ship full of captured slaves leaving Brazil, West Africa, led by a Portuguese merchantman, never arrived for Brazil for its delivery. 3 years later, the Danish ship Zeeberg spotted the ship drifting about the Southern Atlantic. They sent a boarding party in search of anything salvageable. Instead, they found a cargo hold full of chained-up undead slaves, moaning and moving. The search party made haste back to their ship and reported their findings to the captain of the Danish ship. Decided to sink the abandoned ship with cannon fire. No one knows how the virus made its way to the boat, nor the fate of the ship crew except for the captain, who was found locked in his cabin having committed suicide with his pistol. Only speculation surround the mystery of the incident. Perhaps the virus was brought on by one of the ship crew or one of the slaves, which in turn spread to the rest of the ship. Recorded attack number 22. Date of attack, 1762 AD. Location of attack, Cassitrius, St. Lucia, the Caribbean. Outbreak class, level 3. Subnosis. This outbreak is probably the most notorious of all the recorded attacks so far, tales of it being told to this day. An outbreak of unknown origin started in the city of Cassitrius on the island of St. Lucia. The whites chalked it up to be an outbreak of rabies. All the zombies in the initial wave were locked up in the jail, while the whites who were been trying to restrain the infected were sent home without treatment. The free blacks and muleteros immediately recognized the threat and nature and threat of the incident, though they tried to warn the whites. The whites were arrogant and refused to heed their warnings. Within 2 days, the entire city was in chaos. The local militia was unaware and unprepared about how to deal with the outbreak. Therefore, they were easily overwhelmed and overrun. The Bin survivors fled from the chaos, unknowingly spreading the infection throughout the entire island. Any remaining white survivors fled by seacraft or held in one of the 3 fortresses on the island. The black population, free or slave, and muleteros were left with their freedom but at the mercy of the undead. However, these individuals knew their enemy extremely well. They knew exactly how to deal with them. They all banded together for a battle unlike any other. They were forming into various hunting parties with only torches to light their way and various melee weapons to defend themselves. Their coordination was solid, communicating via drums. In a slow yet consistently strong way, they cleared the infested island within a week. About 10 days after the last zombie was killed, British and French colonial troops arrived at the island to assess the situation. Assuming that this was a slave uprising, they immediately enslaved all the former slaves. All the free blacks and muleteros were either enslaved or hung for aiding in the supposed revolution. Despite ending on a depressing note, the only positive knowledge to learn from this is that if humans were to stand up as a formula against the undead, it will be one united. Recorded attack number 23. Date of attack, 1807 AD. Location of attack, Paris, France. Outbreak class, level 1. Subnosis. A man was admitted into a hospital for the criminally insane. The official reports stated that the man acted feral in nature, who craved nothing but violence. Another inmate was bitten trying to restrain the man. The doctors gave minor treatment to the patient and placed him back in the cell with the other patients. For a week, there was nothing but gore and violence within the cell. Guards and doctors were too afraid to enter until all the screaming stopped. They discovered about 5 zombies that were partially eaten, feasting on the remains of other patients. All the others were completely devoured. This raised a lot of questions about the attack. Where did the man come from? Did he infect anyone else prior to being brought to the hospital? How did he become infected? Where are all the zombies in the attack? We may never know. Recorded attack number 24. Date of attack 1824 AD. Location of attack Southern Africa. Outbreak class not applicable. Synopsis. This recorded attack was written by one of the members of the original British expedition to meet with the Zulu king Shaka. When the expedition was negotiating with the king himself, this member witnessed the rite of passage ceremony. The young warrior, armored with leather, went up against a zombie in combat. Although he initially had the upper hand, he was bested by the monster and was nearly killed. The king stepped in and killed the zombie before he could kill the young warrior. This raises the question: How did they gather knowledge of the undead and use this in ritual combat? And where do they come from? Recorded attack number 25. Date of attack 1839 AD. Location of attack East Africa. Outbreak class not applicable. Synopsis. An entry of the diary of Sir James Aston Hayes could hint at an encounter with a zombie attack. He states that a young African man came back to the village from a hunt with a bite wound on his arm. When he went to the village's doctor for a consult, they gave him the unfortunate news of what it was. The young man seemed to understand what this affliction was. He said goodbye to his wife and children, and the doctors proceeded to kill him, dismember him, and burn his body to ashes. Little is known about the true nature of the tribe or its location. Recorded attack number 26. Date of attack 1848 AD. Location of attack Owl Creek Mountains, Wyoming. Outbreak class unknown. Synopsis. The first recorded attack in the U.S. A group of pioneers expediting the mountains to reach California, named the Kunhassan Party, disappeared on their way to the destination. A year later, a second expedition discovered the remains of the first party. The signs of struggle of battle were apparent. They noticed that most of the skulls were severely damaged, either by weapon of brute force or gunshots. One suggested that Indians were responsible, but the theory was clearly disproven when they noticed that the carcasses of horses and oxen were to be severely mauled. Unlikely behavior for the Indians, who instead would have taken the animals. The party also couldn't figure it out when they would turn on each other so quickly while food supplies were still plentiful. This record hints rather than confirms the possibility of zombie attack, however, but there is still enough evidence to prove otherwise. Recorded attack number 27. Date of attack 1852 AD. Location of attack Chiapas, Mexico. Outbreak class not applicable. Synopsis. A trio of American treasure hunters ventured to Mexico to discover the rumored Mayan ruins. After stopping in a town called Tenzitio, they witnessed the townsfolk trying to bury a man alive who was bound and gagged, to which the locals called him a drinker of Satan's blood. The trio believed that this being a cruel execution, therefore rescued the man. When they took the gag and bounds off, the man immediately attacked the trio, killing one of them and biting the other two. Their families received letters of the remaining duo written the day after the attack. They claimed that their friend came back to life and began to roam around. The two survivors talked about a horrible fever they were experiencing and pain from the bite wound. They said they will stay in town for a couple of weeks for rest and medical attention, then return to the States as soon as they can. The trio from that day forward were never heard from again. A rather sad tale. Recorded attack number 28. Date of attack 1867 AD. Location of attack in the Indian Ocean. Outbreak class level 1. Synopsis. An English ship by the name of RMS Roma was transporting convicts to Australia when they anchored at a sandbar to investigate a beach ship there. The shore party discovered a zombie crawling on the floor because its back was broken. When they reached out to investigate further, the undead lunged and bit off the fingers of one of the crewmates. One other crewmate cut off the head using a melee weapon. When they brought the wounded back to the ship, the doctor of the ship let the injured rest with a bottle of rum, promising to treat the injury in the morning. The bin crewmate died and reanimated, then attacked the ship crew. The captain made a hasty decision in a panic to lock the undead crewmate with the convicts in the cargo hold. For the 6 weeks that it took them to reach Perth, the ship crew heard agonizing screams of the inmates turned into howling moans. One sailor stated that they could even hear squeaking of panicking rats among the cargo hold. After arriving at the destination, the ship crew told the locals about the situation, however, no one believed them, just thinking that they were cowards to bring the convicts themselves. 6 days after reaching land, waiting for troops to escort the prisoners, a storm broke the anchor of the ship and the ship drifted several miles offshore, eventually hitting a coral patch which sunk the ship. The townsfolk and ship crew found no convicts or undead left on the ship, only bones of the remains of the convicts and tracks leading back towards the island. Recorded attack number 29. Date of attack, 1882 AD. Location of attack, Piedmont, Oregon. Outbreak class, unknown. Synopsis. A relief party was sent to the mining town of Piedmont after 2 months of silence and isolation. They discovered the town to be in complete disarray. Several houses burned to the ground, and those that were still standing were riddled with bullet holes. The party was surprised to notice that the signs of gunfire came from inside the house rather than outside. While investigating the town, the party discovered about 27 skeletons, mangled corpses. This was a dead giveaway of a zombie attack. The search party also noticed that the food supplies of the town could have lasted them throughout winter, so it wouldn't make sense for the townsfolk to start fighting over lack of supplies. The party made a gruesome discovery at the mines of the town, however. The entry shaft had been blasted shut, with about 48 men, women, and children who have all starved to death inside. One widely accepted theory suggests that one or a group of zombies came from the wilderness and attacked the town. After a violent battle, the decision was made to seal themselves inside the mine for protection until help arrived. It suggested that before, or what could have helped justify the decision to seal themselves away, some survivors trenched out to the wilderness to get help. However, no one from the town ever made contact to anyone outside after the attack. So either they succumbed to the elements or were eaten by the undead. The company that owned the mines never reopened the mines following the incident and paid $20 compensation to the families of the miners to remain silent. This incident wasn't discovered until the company's bankruptcy in 1931. Recorded attack number 30. Date of attack 1888 AD. Location of attack Hayward, Washington. Outbreak class level 2. Synopsis. This record could be, if proven true, detail the first professional zombie hunter in history. An outbreak in the town of Hayward started when a fur trapper named Gabriel Allens stumbled into town with a deep gash on his arm and looking differently than usual. Allen spoke of a soul who wandered like a man possessed, his skin as gray as stone, his eyes fixed in a lifeless stare. When Allens approached the wrench, he let out a hideous moan and bit the trapper on his right arm. This statement was from a passage from a journal from the town's doctor named Jonathan Wilkes. Not much is known of how the outbreak spread from there. Sources suggest that Dr. Wilkes was the next victim along with 3 men who attempted to restrain him. 3 days after the initial incident, the town was under siege. Many of the townsfolk was holed up inside their homes and the town church while the hordes attempted to break down the barricades. Although there were plenty of firearms and ammunition, no one figured out the undead's fatal weakness for headshots. Food and water rapidly ran dry since no one believed they would be trapped for more than 6 days. In the morning of the 7th day of the siege, A Loka man named Elijah Black arrived on horseback. Wielding a U.S. Army cavalry saber, he decapitated 12 zombies in 20 minutes. He then used a charred stick to draw a circle around the town's water before climbing onto the top of the tower. He yelled, blew his old army bungle, and used his horde as bait to gather the undead to surround the water tower in a fruitless attempt to reach him. To which he managed in a careful and disciplined manner, headshot each zombie with his Winchester repeater. For 6 hours, he continued the strategy until all 59 zombies were eliminated. By the time the townsfolk realized what had transpired, he disappeared. Other sources have managed to gather the full extent of Black's history. Elijah Black was a 15-year-old boy who had been on a hunting party with his grandfather when he stumbled upon the Kudhazan Party massacre. A man who was infected prior turned and attacked the rest of the party. Black and his grandfather managed to destroy the undead attackers with a tomahawk throws to the head, decapitation, and fire to burn the undead. A 30-year-old woman survivor claimed how the infestation spread, and now half of the undead party into the wilderness. Wandered into the wilderness. She confessed to prior infection, revealing a bite wound, which in turn she unanimously begged for death. After the mass mercy killings of the former hunting party, Black's grandfather confided to him about a hidden bite wound he suffered in the battle. This led to the probably most difficult mercy killing and the last kill before becoming a professional, being his own grandfather. After that fateful day, Elijah Black dedicated the rest of his life to hunting down the remaining ghouls of the Kudhazan party. Although he never reached Pine Mount, with each encounter of the undead, he gained vital and invaluable information. He managed to dispatch 9 zombies that wandered into the wilderness following this attack on Hayward. No one knows how his life was after this attack or how inevitably ended. In 1939, his biography was published in books and various articles were in the English paid newspapers. A dedicated search is going on to this day to recover this lost media. Recorded attack number 31. Date of attack, 1893 AD. Location of attack, Fort Louis Philippe, French North Africa. Outbreak class, level 2. Synopsis. One of the most serious attacks in recorded history. One of the most serious recorded attacks in history come from a diary from a junior officer from the French Foreign Legion that occupied North Africa. 3 hours after dawn he came, a lone Arab on foot, on the brink of death from sun and thirst. After a day's rest with treatment and water, he related the story of a plague which turns its victims into cannibalistic horrors. Before our expedition into the village could be mounted, lookouts on the south wall spotted what appeared to be a horde of animals on the horizon. Through my glasses, I could see they were not beasts but men, their flesh absent of color, their cloths worn and tattered. As the wind shifted, it was brought to us, first a withering groan, then long after, a stench of human decay. We guessed these poor wretches to be on heels of our survivor. How they managed to traverse such a distance without food or water, we could not say. Calls and warnings produced no response. Bursts of our cannon did nothing to scatter them. Long-range rifles seemed to have no effect. Corporal Strom was immediately dispatched on horseback to Bir el Kasb while we shut the gates and prepared for an attack. This attack holds as the longest recorded undead siege in history, with the soldiers being trapped in the fort by the undead for 3 years. The soldiers quickly ran out of ammo trying to kill the undead because they couldn't figure out the only way to kill the undead was headshots. Accidental headshots weren't enough for them to learn their weakness. Corporal Strom was never heard from again, presumably succumbing to the elements of the desert or hostile Arab forces. The soldiers were able to survive due to a well which connected directly to a fresh water source, and the first supply of food arrived just before the siege. Any pack animals and horses were killed and rationed when the food from the supply run inevitably ran out. The soldiers tried everything from homemade explosives and Molotov cocktails to hurling large stones at the enemy. Nothing was very successful. The constant moans and wails from the undead drove several men insane, which caused 2 suicides and several soldiers to attempt jumping down from the fort to escape, which resulted in them being quickly devoured. A brief mutiny brought down the total rank to 27 remaining soldiers. By this time, the commanding officer made a final desperate plan. All men were equipped with a fresh supply of water while little food remained. All ladders and staircases leading up to the parapets were destroyed. We assembled on the south wall and began to call to our tormentors, gathering almost all right to our gates. Colonel Drax, with the courage of a man possessed, was lowered into a parade ground, where he lifted the bolt himself. Suddenly the stinking mildewed swarmed into our fortress, leading the wrenches across the parade ground. Through the barricades in the mess hall, across the infirmary, he was holstered to safety just in time. A severed rotting hand clasped tightly to his boot. We continued to call the creatures, booing and hissing, jumping about like wild monkeys. Only now we were calling to the creatures within our own fort. Dorest and O'Toole were lowered into the north wall. They sprinted to the gate and pulled it shut. Their creatures inside, in their mindless rage, did not think to simply pull open again. Pushing as they did inwards against the inward opening gates, they only succeeded in trapping themselves further. The soldiers were then dropped safely onto the desert and dispatched a few undead stragglers in a vicious hand-to-hand combat. From there, they made their brutal 240-mile march to the nearest oasis in Bur Donain. Official army records do not detail this incident at all anywhere, nor any explanation for no investigation of the fort when regular dispatches stopped arriving. The only official nod to this attack, to the soldiers involved with the attack, was the court-martial and imprisonment of Colonel Drax. Transcripts of the case remain sealed. Rumors of the attack spread across the French army and society for decades. Many fictional stories were written about the unofficially dubbed the Devil's Siege. Despite denials for the incident, the French Foreign Legion never sent an expedition to the fort ever again. Recorded attack number 32. Date of attack, 1901 AD. Location of attack, Lausanne, Formsa. Location of outbreak class, unknown. Synopsis. An American sailor by the name of Billy Wolowski recalled an incident while serving the Asiatic fleet. Peasants from the village of Lushan rose up and began attacking the other villagers. Due to the remote village having poor infrastructure of telecommunications, the distress call wasn't received until a week after the attack. Billy described how Pastor Alfred, who accompanied them on the mission, lectured the Chinamen's lack of faith in Christianity or Catholicism, and that were now being punished by God with this attack. Their skipper wanted to hold put and wait for reinforcements for this assignment, but the pastor was impatient and went ahead with a handful of missionaries to the village. When their party and national troops arrived at the village at noon, they discovered a massacre. Bodies and pieces of flesh were all over the ground, making it squishy, and they noticed the smell being god-awful. Then a handful of zombies came out of the mist to attack them. The troops fired at the undead, but did nothing to weigh them. A soldier named Riley went ballistic and charged at the zombie to stab it with a bayonet, not knowing that the undead don't feel pain. He was immediately swarmed and mauled to death. Billy could only hear the screams of his fellow comrade and watched as they tore him from limb to limb. A monk came out of nowhere and decapitated all the zombies present and got the skipper to understand that they needed to shoot the zombies in the head to kill them. They discovered among the bodies were some of the missionaries, including the pastor who had been snapped by a bullet. Following Billy releasing the full account of the story to a pulp magazine, he was immediately discharged and imprisoned. He refused to recount the day following his release, and the U.S. Navy denies the whole story. Recorded attack number 33. Date of attack 1505 AD. Location of attack Tambora, Talianskia, German, East Africa. Outbreak class unknown. Synopsis. A judicial trial details a case where a native called Simon was arrested and charged with decapitation of a famous white hunter by the name of Carl Seek. A Dutch planter named Guy Wooster came to Solomon's defense, claiming what he did was a heroic act. Simon's people believe that a malady exists that robs the life force of a man. In his place is left a body, dead yet still living, without a sense of self or surroundings, and with only cannibalism as its drive. Furthermore, the victims of the undead monster will rise from their own graves to devour even more victims. This cycle will be repeated again and again until nothing is left upon our earth but these horrible flesh-eating monstrosities. My client described Herr Screet rising from his deathbed to set his teeth upon the rest of the party. My client used his native blade to decapitate Herr Screet and incinerate his head on a campfire. Wooster added that although he didn't agree with Simon's testimony, he submitted to have Simon be viewed as insane to not be executed. However, the law back then only applied to white men for me to be insane, not other races. Therefore, Simon was executed by hanging after the trial. The records are still present, unsurprisingly, in terrible condition. Recorded attack number 34. Date of attack 1911 AD. Location of attack Vitre, Louisiana. Outbreak class level 1. Synopsis. This attack is being passed on as a common old American legend in the south of the U.S. On Halloween in 1911, a group of young Cajuns were on a dare to spend a night in the bayou in the town of Vitre. Unconfirmed rumors to tales of zombies that originally came from the plantation resided in the swamps in the bayou. The teens never returned from the bayou by noon of the next day. A search party was sent to find the teens. When they reached the swamps, they were attacked by about 30 zombies, which included the missing teenagers. In a state of panic, the search party hurried back to the town, unknowingly leading the horde back to the town. Many citizens barricaded themselves in their homes and buildings. One man named Henry de la Croix doused the undead with micellar, believing the insects would eat the zombie flesh. He was quickly proven wrong. Other citizens doused the zombies in kerosene and set them ablaze. This quickly as the undead began setting houses in flames as they tried to get the people trapped inside. This caused many of the town's population to be burned to death. The rest of the survivors retreated to the swamps. A rescue party was sent to the town a few days later. They counted up to 48 survivors. The rest of the town's population was either burned or eaten to death. Vitre itself was completely destroyed. All the houses and structures were completely burned to the ground. When all the corpses were counted off, that remained as 15 people were still unaccounted for. Any records and recounts of the outbreak is being shared with relatives and descendants of the survivors. Recorded attack number 35. Date of attack 1913 AD. Location of attack Paramaribo, Suriname. Outbreak class not applicable. Synopsis. Dr. Jan van der Haven, following in the footsteps of the late Dr. Abraham Obadiah, studying the coronavirus and the nature of the living dead when he traveled to the South American colony to investigate a breakout of this disease. He states the physical symptoms similar to those cases he used to experience before around the globe. However, he ends the similarity of how the patient has gone mad with this affliction, not thinking rationally or recognizing anything presenting to them. How they refuse to eat food except for living. When one of the keepers of the undead threw an injured rat at the horde, they watched as it proceeded to swallow it whole. He stated that the behavioral patterns of the undead as rabid animals in their hostility. When an influential figure went against protocol from the hospital to visit her infected husband, she was bitten by him. Despite all attempts at treatment, she passed away and her body was handed up to relatives despite the doctor's pleading objections. The day after she died, her body was reported stolen, with experimentation ruling out the possibility of a bacterial infection. The doctor concluded that his affliction was caused by a contagious living fluid, to which he dubbed Solanum. This medical record is instrumental in the research of the virus and where the virus got its official name. When the doctor returned home, he published his works to which the scientific community neither praised or ridiculed his work being overshadowed in the turn of the First World War, not being discovered until nearly almost a century later. Recorded attack number 36. Date of attack, 1923 AD. Location of attack, Colombo, Clayton. Outbreak class not applicable. Synopsis. This record comes from a newspaper for Britons living in the Indian Ocean colonies. Christopher Wells, he was a co-pilot for various flights with the British Imperial Airways. He was being rescued from a life craft after being stuck out at sea for 2 weeks. He recounted the events that led up to his current predicament. He was transporting a particular cargo for the British expedition to Mount Everest. It was a European man whose clothes was dating back to a century later. He was completely frozen, perfectly preserved under the ice. Because of his circumstance, the crew decided to fly him to Canberra for further study. However, during the long flight, the frozen man's ice melted and he eventually came back to life and attacked the flight crew. After a brief skirmish, they finished off the zombie by bashing his skull into the extinguisher, though killing it remained but unintentional. Though the threat of the zombie was eliminated, they still had to deal with the plane going down due to systems taking damage from the flight. The flight crew, which consisted of the pilot, the co-pilot, Wells himself, and a crew chief, all jumped out parachute from the plane into the ocean. While it seemed like the worst was behind them, the bite mark on the crew chief's arm proved otherwise as he died. Reanimated the next day and attacked the pilot and Wells. While the pilot and the zombified crew chief wrestled, Wells kicked them both overboard into the sea. After sharing the story, Wells fell unconscious and died the next day. To this day, no one's been able to find the alleged aircraft and thawed zombie, the aircraft or crew chiefs themselves. Now we move on to the modern era. Recorded attacks number 37, 38, 39. Dates of attacks range from 1942 AD, 1942 to 1945 AD, and 1943 AD. Location of attacks can range from the Central Pacific, Harbin Japanese puppet state of Manchukuo, modern-day Manchuria, and North French Africa. Outbreak classes consist of Level 1, not applicable, and unknown. After reviewing these recorded attacks, I've concluded to best summarize and analyze these attacks all in one due to their close proximity to each other, chronologically speaking, and how they intertwine with each other in future outbreaks. Starting with the Central Pacific. Tells the story of a unit of Imperial Japanese soldiers being sent to the garrison Atuk on an island of the Caroline chain. After they arrived, they were attacked by a swarm of zombies that resided on the island. It could be noted that this was perhaps the same island that Sir Francis Drake mentioned in his record as the Azel of the Damned. However, this remains unconfirmed. After the initial fight, the Japanese were experiencing heavy losses. Therefore, they made a tactical retreat to the fortified garrison on the north end mountaintop of the island. They were safe from the immediate threat of the zombies, as the zombies they could not scale the walls, but also prevented the soldiers from escaping either. Much like the Fort Lewis attack, the platoon sniper was the first to discover that shooting the shooting the zombie in the head was enough to kill them. Taking this newfound knowledge, the rest of the unit dispatched the remaining dead and left the garrison to do a complete sweep of the island. The lieutenant Hiroshi Tamaja testified that when radio communications with Tokyo had been restored, they were ordered to refrain from killing and capture zombies alive. A difficult task yet accomplished as they managed to successfully capture 4 zombies that were taken away by an Imperial submarine. The Imperialist states that he does not know what their government did with the undead. They were ordered to never discuss the incident to anyone with the penalty of death for failure to obey. These zombies were later used for other purposes of other occupations during World War II, as we'll see here. A unit of the Japanese army known as the Black Dragon was in charge of an experiment involving the undead, and a Solana virus called Cherry Blossom, with the purpose of creating zombies for use in the military during the war. The Japanese managed to get a copy of Vanderhaven's work, and from there they learned the nature of the virus and the infected. Using this newfound knowledge, they made a plan for integration of zombies into the military. However, no sample of the virus itself could ever be secured, most likely due to the efforts of the Brotherhood of Life. But the Atuk Island incident sparked new hope as the experiment would fly subjects capable of crafting creating more zombies. The 4 captured zombies were brought to Harbin, where one was kept alive and attacked for the specifically breeding more zombies with political prisoners. The other 3 were used in experimentation. When the experiment had 40 zombies at their disposal, they attempted to train the zombies to be obedient for their use in the field. This went as well as expected. No progress whatsoever, and 16 trainers being binned and turned. After 2 years of no progress, the military said fuck it and decided to release the 50 zombies now into the field regardless of their condition. One of these deployment attempts was made to airdrop them onto British forces in Burma. However, the aircraft transporting the dead was shot down by anti-air guns, and the explosion and fire that ensued from the crash destroyed any traces of the zombies in the craft. Another 2 attempts were made using submarines to release the hordes onto the battle. The first 2 to use on an American-held Panama Canal. The ship was sunk en route to the destination. The second attempt was made to use them on the west coast of the United States. However, before they could reach the U.S., the zombies broke free and attacked the ship crew, which forced them to scuttle the ship. A final attempt was made to airdrop the remaining zombies onto Chinese forces in Yunnan Province. 9 of the 10 zombies were killed via headshots of the Chinese guerrilla snipers. The soldiers weren't aware of the nature nor necessity of the headshots of their opponents. They were simply trained to always aim for the head. The last remaining zombie was captured and transported to Mao Zedong's personal headquarters. The Soviet Union invaded Montenegro in 1945, which is when all records of experiment Cherry Blossom went missing. This told account of Cherry Blossom was told by former U.S. Army intelligence officer David Shore. He claimed 2 Imperial officers testified these claims when they were debriefed after the war. Shore went on to publish the stories in a book in 1951 called The Sun Rose on Hell. However, before he could release the book, the U.S. government confiscated all copies produced and sent Shore to jail for life until he was pardoned in 1961, to which he died of a heart attack 2 months later. In the present day, his daughter Hannah won the rights to republish the book in a lawsuit. The last mention of a possible attack comes from a recollection of a private first class Anthony Morneau. He was a gunner alongside a U.S. Army B-24 bomber. He was returning to base from a night raid of German troops concentrations in Italy. They were low on fuel and lost over a desert. The pilot thought he saw a settlement within the desert and ordered the rest of his jump crew to bail out and head towards it. The settlement was the remains of the Fort Louis Felipe. It looked as though it was out of a kid's nightmare. We opened the gates and there was no bar on it or nothing. We walked into the courtyard and there was these skeletons. Mountains of them, no kidding. Just piled up everywhere. Like a movie. Our skipper, he just kind of shakes his head and says, "Sort of feels like there should have been a buried treasure here, you know?" Good thing none of the bodies was in the well. We managed to fill up our canteen, grab some supplies. There wasn't no food, but who won? Who won anyway, you know? The plane crew were rescued by Arab Caribbean where when they questioned the fort state, they received no answer from the Arabs. The US Army didn't find it interesting nor important to investigate it further based on the soldiers' debrief. Recorded attack number 40. Date of attack 1947. Location of attack Gervais, British Columbia. Outbreak class level 1. Synopsis. A post-war outbreak details a small outbreak of this region, of a bloody battle and heroic outcome of this Canadian tale. Historians believe that a hunter by the name of Matthew Morgan brought the virus upon the town when he returned home one day after suffering a mysterious bite from an unknown attacker. By the dawn of the next morning, 21 zombies were roaming onto the street in the town. In the wake of the attack, 9 people were completely consumed by the attackers. The remaining 15 citizens barricaded themselves in the sheriff's office. One discovered that headshots killed the monsters, but couldn't get a good shot with all the barricades in the windows. The survivors hatched a plan to escape the roof and make it across to the telephone/telegraph office to call the authorities. They made it halfway when a zombie spotted them and alerted the others to them. Regina Clark told the others to continue to the goal while she distracted the horde. With only a US M1 carbine alongside her, she led the undead into a narrow alley where she managed to kill all of them without missing once. Witnesses suspect she did this on purpose to only allow 4 targets at a time, which gave her crowd control of the undead. Officials labeled the incident as an unexplainable display of violence. All articles were based on the accounts of other citizens, while Clark herself denied to be interviewed, and her memoirs being a guarded secret of the family. Recorded attack number 41. Date of attack 1954 AD. Location Than Hao, French in Indochina. Outbreak class not applicable. Synopsis. This record comes from Jean Bernat Lacouture, a French businessman who was living in his colony before it fell to Ho Chi Minh's communist guerrillas. The game is called Devil's Dance. A living human is placed in a cage with one of the creatures. Our human has with it only a small blade, perhaps 8 centimeters at most. Will he survive the waltz with the corpse? If not, how long will it last? Bets are taken for these and other variables. We keep a stable of them, those fetid gladiators. Most were turned from the victims of the failed match. Soon we take to the street. Some we take from the street. We pay their families well. God have mercy on me for this unimaginable sin. This letter, along with the good fortune, arrived in Lorique, France, with about 3 months after the fall of the colony. No one knows whatever happened to the game Lacouture referred to. 1 year after this event, his body arrived in France, badly decomposed with a bullet to the brain. The Vietnamese coroner stated the cause of death was suicide. Recorded attack number 42. Date of attack 1957 AD. Location of attack Mombasa, Kenya. Outbreak class unknown. Possible class 1 outbreak. Synopsis. This record comes from an interrogation between a British Army officer and a Gikuyu rebel captured during the Mau Mau uprising. The officer in question asked how many men did the prisoner encounter. The prisoner responded with 5 men. The officer asked to describe them. The prisoner describes them as white men with their skin gray and cracked with many wounds on their bodies, many of them being bite marks. All of them having seemingly fatal bullet wounds to their chest. The prisoner goes on to say how they stumbled and groaned as they walked. They couldn't see, and their teeth had blood on them. They smelled terrible so much that animals fled them. After that response, a brief argument between the prisoner and a translator erupted. After the prisoner fell silent, the officer asked him exactly what happened. The prisoner responded that the men started walking towards them. In response, the prisoner and his fellow comrades cut their heads off using lanterns, a machete-like melee weapon, then buried the heads. The officer asked why he buried the heads. The prisoner responded that using a fire to burn them would have given away the position. The officer asked if he was wounded. The prisoner responds that he wouldn't be here if he was. The prisoner asks if he was afraid. The prisoner only responds he only fears the living. The officer asks if they were evil spirits. The prisoner chuckles at the question. The officer asks what he found funny about the question. The prisoner states that evil spirits were created to frighten children. The men he encountered were walking death. The prisoner gave very little information and remained mostly silent after a response. As of today, no further investigation was initiated to this case. Recorded attack number 43. Date of attack 1960 AD. Location of attack BDL-Gorozatsk, Soviet Union. Outbreak class level 3. Synopsis. This record recalls the Soviets' attempt at Operation Cherry Blossom as the Soviets who invaded Manchuria captures and/or stole most of the data. Zombie test subjects and kidnapped most of the scientists who were involved with Black Dragon's experiments. As the rumors were proven true by the evidence of them in the modern day. The new Soviet project of Cherry Blossom was renamed as Dugon. Was conducted near a small town in eastern Siberia, with the art facility being a prison made to house political prisoners, which not only allowed for secrecy for the experiment, but also provided a steady supply of test subjects. The ultimate purpose of this project was to provide and/or train zombies for World War III when it would inevitably come. For unforeseen and unknown reasons, the project went awry, which led to a complete disaster which caused an uncontrollable outbreak. Several hundred zombies congregated at the prison, trapping the few scientists who managed to escape to the prison inside with no means of escape. Despite their situation, they believed they had a good chance to make it through the attack by remaining within the prison. Help never arrived, however. One school of thought believed that it was due to the remote nature of the location of the attack. A second theory presents that the project was started by Joseph Stalin and the KGB were too scared to inform Premier Kirata, the premier, of the situation and the existence and the experiment. A third and widely accepted theory is that the Soviet leadership were aware of the situation the whole time and ringed the area with soldiers to prevent the breakout and further spread of the outbreak. While both sides were waiting for a result of the siege, the correlation of scientists, prisoners, and soldiers coexisted with each other very well within inside the prison walls. All of them working together, they created greenhouses for food, wells for water, and sustained electricity using wind turbines and human dynamos. They could easily survive until the next winter, where all the zombies would freeze over, allowing them to escape. 3 days before the autumn frost, a Soviet aircraft dropped a thermonuclear bomb onto the outbreak zone. No further reports were sent out after the blast. Recorded attack number 44. Date of attack 1962 AD. Location of attack unidentified town, Nevada. Outbreak class level 1. Synopsis. Specifics of this attack are surprisingly vague and sketchy due to the era it took place in when information would be easy to get. From bits and pieces of the stories that can be gathered from secondhand witnesses, news articles, and a vague police report, a small outbreak of zombies occurred and besieged the farm of Hank Davis. He was holed up on the farm with 3 of his hired hands trying to fend off the undead. They were held up in the barn for 5 days and nights. When the police inevitably showed up, they killed the horde and investigated the barn for Davis and his men. They inevitably found them all dead. More specifically, three of his men were killed, while the fourth one killed himself. This can only be alluded to the stress, feelings of isolation, and hopelessness, mixed with relentless moaning of the undead, led to a complete psychological breakdown. No physical explanation was ever given to the outbreak, nor was the source of the outbreak ever found. To this day, the investigation is still underway. Recorded attack number 45. Date of attack 1968 AD. Location of attack Eastern Laos. Outbreak class unknown. Hypnosis. A substance abuse patient in the Veterans Association's hospital in Los Angeles was a former Special Forces sniper named Peter Stravios. Shared a story from his time in Vietnam to a psychiatrist. He and his team were en route to a search and destroy mission to a village alongside the Vietnamese border, suspected of being a staging area for the pamphlet Lao. When they arrived at the village, they discovered that the village was already under siege by the undead. The villagers were fighting with all their might against the undead. For unknown reasons, the team leader ordered an airstrike on the village, to which a twin of Sky Raiders spawned the village with napalm. No undead nor humans survived the bombings. No official report exists to correspond to the story, and the rest of his team were unavailable for the interview. Recorded attack number 46. Date of attack 1971 AD. Location of attack Nagawa Valley, Rwanda. Outbreak class unknown. Hypnosis. A wildlife journalist named Jane Massey was sent by the magazine company she worked for to travel to the region to study the endangered silverback gorillas. This following was taken from her from her written record. As we stepped into the deep valley, I heard the movement of something in the foliage below. Our guide saw it too and encouraged us to keep up the pace. At that moment, I saw something pretty rare for the part of the world. Complete silence. No birds, no animals, not even insects. And we're talking some pretty loud insects. I asked Kenge, and he just told me to keep it down. From down in the valley, I could hear this creepy moan. Kevin, the expedition's photographer, turned even wider than usual and kept saying it must be the wind. Now, I heard wind in Sarawak, Sri Lanka, the Amazon, and even Nepal, and that was not the wind. Kangri put a hand on his machete and encouraged us to shut up. I told him I wanted to go down to the valley to check it out. He refused. When I pushed, he said the dead walked there and took off. She never explored the valley to discover the sources of the moans. Her guide's story could be chalked up as superstition or what could have been the wind. But the geology of the valley and the steep cliffs in all directions, which would make it impossible for zombies to escape. Theoretically, the valley could be used by tribes to keep captured zombies contained. Recorded attack number 47. Date of attack 1975 AD. Location of attack Ali Mak, Egypt. Outbreak class level 1. Hypnosis. The information surrounding this outbreak compiled into a series of eyewitness accounts, a handful of Egyptian soldiers, and several international journalists. An outbreak occurred within this town. No origin of the outbreak was ever clear. The calls for help from the residents were unanswered for some time as the IDF didn't take the call seriously and thought it was a hoax. It was only when Colonel Jacob Korsonski, an American Jew and former colleague of the late David Shore, knew about the existence of zombies and the threat they posed. He managed to convince Minister Gola Meir to send in a squad of soldiers to check out the situation. By the time they were parachuted into the infestation zone, the attack had just finished its second week of the siege and 9 survivors had barricaded themselves from the undead. After a 12-hour battle, they managed to kill all of the horde. The ending of the attack varies as there is no good conclusion. Speculation suggests that they were rounded up by all the survivors to be executed, only reconsidering after the survivors plead with them and seen the zombie corpses for themselves. Korsonski died in 1991. All his personal possessions and monumentals, and even recorded footage of the battle, were sealed away by the Israeli government. If this story is true, why did the soldiers so easily believe the existence of zombies purely off of survivor stories and corpses? Recorded attack number 48. Date of attack 1979 AD. Location Sperry, Alabama. Outbreak class level 1. Synopsis. A seemingly average day in this American town went away when a mailman doing his rounds of delivering mail was brought to a stop when he arrived at a Hendricks farm to see the previous mail had not been collected. Curious and somewhat concerned, he walked up to the house to investigate. As he approached the house, he heard gunshots and what sounded like cries of pain and calls for help. He immediately retreated to his van and drove away to the nearest telephone to call the police. Two sheriffs and a paramedic team arrived to assess the situation. They arrived to see the Hendricks family brutally slaughtered, with Freda Hendricks the only survivor with obvious signs of advanced infection. With her already interned, she bit both paramedics before the deputies could restrain her. A third new deputy, who arrived right to the claw, panicked and shot her in the head. The paramedics were sent to the local hospital and died from their injuries. 3 hours after passing away, they arose from the autopsy, attacked the coroner and his assistant to where they escaped to the streets. By midnight of the same day, the entire town was in a state of panic, where 22 zombies roaming around and at least 9 people were being completely devoured at that point. Many survivors fled to the city or barricaded themselves in their home to escape the nightmare. 3 kids climbed to a water tower to escape the hordes, where they remained until they were rescued. A man by the name of Harlan Lee attempted to make a name for himself, left his house and loaded a Uzi submachine gun, a double-barrel shotgun, a .44 Magnum revolver, and an automatic pistol. He was fucking ready for war. He attacked a group of zombies, starting with the Uzi, then cycling through his weapons. He shot their torsos, which caused massive damage but didn't kill them. After nearly exhausting himself and his ammo, he ultimately tried aiming at the head for the kill, but with his hands. But he ultimately tried aiming at the head with a kill, but with his hands trembling in fear, he couldn't kill any of them, which ultimately ended with his demise being devoured alive. By morning, the police forces of nearby towns, state police, and a handful of civilian vigilantes converged on the town, armed with hunting rifles and valuable knowledge of fatal headshots from a hunter who protected his home with using the strategy. They quickly and efficiently destroyed the horde. In the aftermath, the Department of Agriculture released an official statement claiming that this was a mass hysteria from pesticides released into a local water table. The CDC removed all bodies from the town before civilians could perform autopsies on them. Any and all major radio recordings, news footage, and photographs were confiscated. The outrage generated from this attack ended up with 175 lawsuits being filed by survivors. 95 of them being settled outside of court, 45 are still pending. This record goes to show the lengths that the government would go to ensure the outbreak never goes public, either to prevent a mass panic or something else. Recorded attacks number 45 and number 50. Dates of attack, October and December of 1980 AD. Location of attack, Maricela and Julie, Brazil. Outbreak class level 1. Synopsis. An environmental group by the name of Green Mother, whose purpose was to spread awareness and suffering of the Indian population of their land seized, initially spread the news of the outbreak. Cattle farmers took their arms in order to take the Indians' land by force. During their search of the land, however, in the rainforest, they were attacked by a horde of 30 zombies. All the ranchers in the group were either quickly devoured or reanimated and joined the ranks of the undead. Only 2 survivors managed to make it back to the safety of the nearby town of Sturturm. Their cries and warnings were ignored as officially being written off as an uprising of the Indians. 3 army brigades were moved into the town of Mercila. After finding no one there, they moved into the Indian land. The incident was denied by the Brazilian government and denied any knowledge of the undead. Eyewitnesses, however, described the massacre. Brazilian troops patrolling the town, burning everything that walked, zombie or human. Some surprising irony to this story, the Green Mother group also denied this story, saying that this was fabricated to justify the killings of the Indians. One piece of evidence too interesting to pass up is that the present recount is from a recount of a retired major in the army. In the days leading up to the attack, every flamethrower available within the country was requisitioned. After the attack, every single one of them returned empty. It was almost as if the government knew what was coming and attempted to prepare or prevent it from escalating. Roughly 5 weeks later, in an outpost 300 miles downstream of Maricela in Djibouti, reports of attacks came from zombies rising from the water and attacking fishermen in their boats or at the banks. Casualties are still unknown. Recorded attack number 51. Date of attack 1984 AD. Location of attack Cambrio, Arizona. Outbreak class level 1. Subnosis. Despite the minority of this attack in the grand scale, this record, however, is vital in the research of the virus itself. A fire broke out in a local elementary school in this town, which caused the death of 47 children from inhaling the smoke. A 9-year-old girl by the name of Ellen Ames managed to escape through a broken window but had a deep laceration in her arms and a significant amount of blood loss because of it. Fortunately, when she was rushed to the hospital, they did a quick blood transfusion which saved her life. And a half an hour later, after receiving it, however, she began showing signs of a salmonella infection. The staff didn't know what was happening and started testing the blood for toxins and or pathogens. While they were testing it, the child unfortunately passed away, and in full view of the staff and parents. Resurrected as a zombie and bit her attending nurse. The girl was restrained and the bitten nurse was put into quarantine while the attending doctor was detailing the current situation to his colleague in Phoenix. 2 hours later, a handful of doctors came and took the bitten nurse and dented child away in an airlift for further treatment, while being escorted by local law enforcement and federal agents. The Ames family weren't allowed to accompany the child, and after a week of silence from the CDC, they were informed to the family that their child had passed away and had been cremated for health reasons. All records regarding all blood transfusions were confiscated by the CDC as well. This record shows that the Salon virus can be transferred by blood exposure and transfusion. This begs the question: who was the donor of the blood? How did he and anyone else not know he was infected? Why was the colleague from Arizona declined to be interviewed so no one knows for certain? Ellen's parents have filed a lawsuit against the CDC for the sole purpose of uncovering the truth. Well, they're not going to get it. Recorded attack number 52. Date of attack 1987 AD. Location of attack Gaotung, China. Outbreak class unknown. Subnosis. A group of Chinese dissidents informed Western informants of a disaster of a nuclear power plant in Xinjiang. After months of denial from the Chinese officials, they admitted that the facility had experienced a malfunction. The story was changed within a month to attempts acts of sabotage by counter-revolutionary terrorists. In August of the same year, a Swedish newspaper published a story of how U.S. satellite images was leaked to reveal the extent of what happened at the power plant. Several photographs detailed various tanks and armored vehicles firing point blank at a mob of people who were attempting to enter the power plant. While more photographs detailed some of the civilians were surrounding certain individuals, tearing them apart and eating their remains. The U.S. government denies ownership of the photographs and the newspaper retracted their story. To this day, no one's been able to figure out what caused the outbreak, how many zombies were there in total, how the disaster scale wasn't as big as Chernobyl, and several others. A man named Professor Wang Xiao added more to the story when he defected to the United States. He claimed that before he was sent to a re-education center along with other witnesses. A soldier confided to him that the name of the operation, Eternal Waking Nightmare. It's logical to theorize that the Chinese government has its own version of cherry blossom going on behind the scenes. Outbreak Class Number 53. Date of attack, December 1992 AD. Location of attack, Joshua Tree National Monuments, California. Outbreak Class Level 1. Synopsis. Reports of multiple people being from an abandoned tent just off the main road was enough for park rangers to investigate. When they discovered the gruesome scene a mile and a half away from the campsite, a young woman whose head was smashed by a large rock and her body was covered in bite marks. She was later identified as Sharon Parsons, while she and her boyfriend Patrick McDonald were camping there in the previous week. The coroner performing her autopsy revealed that her brain and body's radiative composition were different from each other. Her esophagus reveals chunks of human flesh with the blood that belonged to Patrick McDonald, and a human skin that belonged to a man named Devin Martin, a loner and freelance wildlife photographer who made his way to a park via bicycle a month prior. After a fruitless attempt to search the entire park, surveillance footage revealed McDonald briefly stopping at a gas station where he was seen by an attendant uneasy, frenzied, visibly shaken, holding a bloody cloth over his shoulder. He was last seen driving towards Los Angeles. Recorded attack number 54. Date of attack, January 1993 AD. Location of attack, downtown Los Angeles, California. Outbreak Class Level 2. Synopsis. A couple of young street gang known as the Venice Boardwalk Reds, VBR, entered a post-industrial abandoned area of the city to avenge the death of a fellow gang member by the hands of a rival gang known as Los Perros Negros. They entered this area at about 1 a.m., where it was noted that is one of the rival gang's usual meeting spots. The VBR gang noticed that the complete absence of homeless people, which was odd considering that this was a hotspot and shanty town for the homeless community. Signs of the homeless were present by the various cargo boxes and shopping carts full of items, but no one was to be seen. The red driving the car was too distracted to show the slow-moving pedestrian crossing the street and crashed into the person, slamming into the side of a building. Before his fellow members could berate him and assess the damage, the struck man began to move. Despite breaking its back from the accident, the man began to make its way towards the gang members. One member shot it in the chest that didn't slow down the crawler. The other members began shooting at it with no effect until one of the bullets struck it in the skull and finally killed it. Before it could discover the nature of what they had killed, the gang began hearing moans in all directions. Then, in the shadows producing from the street lights, more than 40 zombies was heading towards them in all directions. The gangs ran from the horror, killing through the thinnest line of the undead. After running for several blocks, they ran across the rival gang, Los Pedros also running from the undead attackers. Choosing survival over rivalry, they called a truce and began running from the undead assailants together. Both gangs were trying to seek refuge in the abandoned buildings that were either boarded up or closed shut. The Pedros, who knew the turf better, led the way towards this Soto Junior High for refuge. They entered the school by breaking one of the windows, which in turn sounded the alarm, which alerted over 100 zombies to their location. Fortunately for the gang members, the school was an excellent choice for a holdout spot. They made a secondary fallback position, seeing the security of the windows and doors, filling receptacles with water, and taking stock of their weapons and ammo. Not risking to get the police involved, both gang alliances called their respective gangs for reinforcements. In the last act of overkill against the undead ever recorded in its history, All members of both gangs managed to kill the entire horde with tight coordination without losing one person from the safety of the two-story window. Unfortunately, when the battle was over, the reinforcements arrived just as the LAPD arrived and arrested all those that was involved. The event was explained as a shootout between rival gangs. While the members involved tried to tell the truth, but the police chalked it off as accounts of being under the influence of ice. All members involved with the shootout were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, where all convicts died within the first year of their sentence, possibly from rival gangs. An LAPD detective who reviewed the McDonald case partially gave the gangs the benefit of the doubt. The coroner's autopsy report matched Parsons' autopsy, with the argument more compelling in the final nail of the coffin being that one of the dead bodies containing a wallet with an ID that belonged to Patrick McDonald. In the fear of disciplinary action, the detective presented this case to the author of this book that I am analyzing. Sorry. The book that I'm talking about, basically. Recorded attack number 55. Date of attack, February 1993 AD. Location of attack, East Los Angeles, California. Outbreak class, level 1. Hypnosis. The owners of a carniceria, a meat market, Octavio and Rosa Miguel, was awoken at 1:45 a.m. to the cries of a person in distress. Fearing that their store was being robbed, Octavio went with his pistol in hand to defend himself in the store while his wife called the police. Octavio saw a quivering and slobbering man whose right foot had been severed off, who was dressed in a Department of Sanitation uniform that was shredded. The man shouted at Octavio to close the manhole, and Octavio complied, hearing a moan just as he closed the manhole. As Rosa was attempting to mend the man's wound, the man rambled into a fit of whimpering, yelling that he and 5 other workers were down in the sewers inspecting a storm drain junction when they were attacked by a large group of crazies, to which he described being covered in rags and wounds, groaning and moaning instead of talking, and moving in a limp. That's all the unidentified man said before he passed out, and the police and paramedics arriving an hour and a half later. It was then when the man was pronounced dead. As they were hauling away the body, an LAPD officer took statements of Octavio. He mentioned he heard him moaning before closing the sewer hole. The officer didn't respond to that. 6 hours after the ordeal, the couple heard on the news that the ambulance carrying the identified worker crashed and exploded while it was on its way to the hospital. The news station managed to get an audio recording of the radio call from the paramedics, where the audio mainly consisted of paramedics frantically calling for help and panicking that the deceased man is breaking free from the body bag. It is unknown how the news station managed to get a copy of the recording. 40 minutes after the news broadcast, several police trucks, an ambulance, and a National Guard trucks arrived and sealed off the entire area and erected a tent over the manhole. The McGetters and the several onlookers heard multiple distant gunfire sounds, and within the hour the tent was taken down and barricades were removed and the vehicles quickly departed. Without a doubt, this record was an aftershock of the downtown Los Angeles attack, and details regarding the government's response and what happened down to the sewer may remain a mystery until the end of time. The LAPD officer explained the incident as a routine health and maintenance inspection, and the Department of Sanitation denies ever losing any workers that day. Recorded attack number 56. Date of attack, March 1994 AD. Location of attack, San Pedro, California. Outbreak class level 1. Hypnosis. This record would not exist if it weren't for Allie Goodwin and her disposable camera to obtain photos of the attack. An unmarked freighter was unlocked into the docks of the SS Mary Caliber, which remained at the docks for several days awaiting pickup of the unknown third party. One night, a watchman heard sounds coming from the container. He brought security cars with him, believing it to house illegal immigrants. When they opened the container, 46 zombies came streaming out of the container, quickly devouring all those who were nearby. The remaining staff The remaining staff at that night seeks shelter in the office buildings, warehouses, or in Goodwin's case, the safety of the cranes. She, along with various other crane operators, remained in safety in the crane for the remainder of the night. The surviving operators began using the machines as weapons, lifting and dropping cranes onto zombies, effectively killing them. By the time police arrived, they took which took a while because the entrance gates were locked. Only 11 zombies remained at large, which the police haphazardly disposed of. When the attack was officially over, only 7 zombies remained unaccounted for. It's reasonable to assume that they fell into the ocean and were carried away by the current. All news stories surrounding the incident were labeled as an attempted break-in. The dockyard management, same pair of police, and security company who lost 8 of its employees remained suspiciously silent. The freighter crew, the captain of the ship, and the company that owned the ship denied any knowledge of the container that also suspiciously disappeared. The port caught fire this day after the attack, which quite the coincidence. This attack truly shows the U.S. government's strength to suppress, falsify, censor, and censor information. Considering that the port was on the busiest ports, surrounded by one of the most heavily populated cities in the United States. Goodwin's photos and statement were both written off as a hoax, with her even being dismissed from her job on the grounds of being due to psychological incompetence. Bastards. Recorded attack number 57. Date of attack, April 1994 AD. Location of attack, Santa Monica Bay, California. Outbreak class level 1, Hypnosis. 3 local residents by the names of James Howard, James Wang, Anthony Chow, and Michael Kim called the police and reported that they were under attack. They were attacked while fishing at the bay. Huang was bonnet fishing when hooked an extremely large catch. What they managed to reel up was a naked, partially burned, and decomposed live man. The man, upon breaking the surface of the water, attacked the trio, starting with attempting to bite Huang in the neck. Cho broke the man's grip off his friends, and Kim slammed an oar on the man's head, which caused him to sink back down into deep water. With that, they headed back to shore where they contacted the police. The local police subjected the 3 men to a drug and alcohol test, which unsurprisingly came back negative. They were held for questioning and released the next morning. Given the close proximity in place and time, it's reasonable to assume that the zombie involved was one of the original zombies involved with the same peril attack. Recorded attack number 58. Date of attack, 1966 AD. Location of attack, the line of control, Samengaro, India. Outbreak class not applicable. Hypnosis. This recorded attack was recorded by Lieutenant Tangor of the Border Security Force, which proceed as follows. The subject approached at a slow stagger, as if ill or intoxicated. I observed he wore the full uniform of Pakistan Rangers. Odd, since none were reported operating in the zone. At 300 meters, we ordered the subject to halt and identify himself. He would not comply. A second warning was given. Still no comply. He seemed to be moaning incoherently at the sounds of our calls. He paced, increased slightly. At 200 meters, he tripped the first mine, an American bouncing Betty. We observed the subject, receiving sharp wounds at his upper and lower torso. He stumbled, fell on his face, and regained his footing, and continued forward. I deduced he wore some type of body armor. This action occurred again at 150 meters. This time, the shrapnel tore the subject's jaw from his face. At this range, I observed that the wound did not bleed. The wind shifted in our direction. We detected a putrid odor from the subject similar to decomposing meat. At 100 yards, I ordered Private Tillock to dispatch the subject. Tillock placed a direct shot towards the subject's forehead. The subject dropped immediately. He did not rise, nor did make any other movement. Subsequent reports states that they recovered and attempted to perform an autopsy of the body before it was taken away by the National Security Guard. Recorded attack number 58. Date of attack 1966 AD. Oh, it's fucking scene one. Recorded attack number 59. Date of attack 1998 AD. Location of attack Zabroskits, Siberia. Location of outbreak class level 2. Subnosis. You know what? Fuck it. I'm just gonna start over. Recorded attack number 59. Date of attack 1998 AD. Location of attack Zabrosk, Siberia. Outbreak class level 2. Subnosis. This record comes from Jacob Taylor, a Canadian documentary filmmaker acclaimed for his previous work. He arrived in a small Siberian town of Zabrosk for the purpose of photographing an attacked saber-toothed tiger carcass. A frozen body of a man in his late 20s, dressed in 16th century Cossack, was also found along with a tiger carcass. After Taylor familiarized himself with the area, they set up for the documentary. He, along with part of his crew, left to go get some much-needed rest, while the other part of the crew stayed to set everything up for the film. That's the last time they interacted. 2 weeks later, Taylor returned to start filming for the documentary. However, all 12 buildings on the site were deserted with signs of violence and forced entry of each building. Taylor was investigating this mystery, when he heard a scream from the helicopter, which led him running back to witness a group of 36 zombies, including the local villagers and his missing film crew, eating the pilots of the helicopter. He didn't know enough about what they were, but he knew enough to run. The situation looked severely grim for Taylor, his cameraman, soundman, and field researcher, as they had no weapons, supplies, and no way to call for help. The survivors took refuge in this 2-story farmhouse in the village, and Taylor forgoes boarding up the farmhouse to destroy the 2 staircases that led to the second story. Meanwhile, they stockpiled the second story with any available food and buckets from the water. They grabbed a sledgehammer, axe, and smaller tools to use to destroy the first staircase. They only managed to destroy 1 staircase before the horde made it the way to their farmhouse. Taylor nailed down doors taken from the second-story rooms onto the staircase to turn it into a ramp so the undead couldn't gain traction to reach them. For 2 days, Taylor and his crew constantly pushed them back the undead, trying to climb up to get them. They each took turns pushing back the undead and sleeping for rest. On the 3rd day, the broom they used to push back the attackers in fear of the undead grabbing their legs broke off from the constant stress. Taylor managed to push up the zombie holding the broom, and the zombie held the broken sharp end of the broom and fell on it, effectively killing it. This gave Taylor a revelation of how they could kill the undead attackers. They then switched their tactics from defense to offense, encouraging the undead to climb so they could deal fatal blows in their head. They first used the axe, then they switched to the sledgehammer when the axe got stuck on the zombie, finally switching to a crowbar when the sledgehammer's handle broke off. After 7 brutal hours, they managed to kill the entire horde. The Russian government had no official explanation for the incident, and every time an official asked about it, they all responded with being looked into. Considering that this is Russia, notorious for its social, economical, political, environmental, and military problems, they have very little interest in a couple of deaths with foreigners and backwoods Siberians. Although Taylor managed to get over 40 hours of footage of the attack, for the last couple of years, he had very little success in getting at least a portion of the footage published to the public. Experts call this footage and claim the hoax, essentially defaming Taylor and making him lose all of his credibility, from going from one of the finest filmmakers to a nobody with a divorce proceeding and handling multiple lawsuits. Recorded attack number 60. Date of attack 2001 AD. Location of attack Sudi, Mosul, Morocco. Outbreak class level 1. Subnosis. This attack comes from a small article in the back of a French newspaper. Outbreak of mass hysteria in Moroccan fishing village. Sources confirmed that a previous unknown neurological condition has affected at least 5 residents, causing them to attack their relatives and friends in an attempt to eat their flesh. Attacking a local custom, they afflicted were bound by ropes and weight. Taken out to sea, then dumped into the ocean. A government investigation is pending, charges ranging from murder to negligent manslaughter. No further reports were made about the incident. Recorded attack number 61. Date of attack 2002 AD. Location of attack St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands. Outbreak class level 1. Hypnosis. Our final and most recent recorded attack, at least for now, details how a zombie was bloated and waterlogged, washed up on the northeast coast of the island. The locals quickly surrounded the ghoul, questioning its nature and calling the police. The zombie slowly got up and made its way towards the locals, which slowly backed away from it. 2 police officers arrived at the scene and ordered the suspect to stop, which it obviously didn't comply. One officer fired a warning shot, which didn't phase the zombie, while the second fired 2 shots at his chest, which also didn't phase the zombie. Just then, a 6-year-old boy, excited from all the commotion, ran up to the undead and started poking it with a stick. The zombie immediately grabbed the child and attempted to raise it to its mouth. When the 2 officers tried to rush and pry the child away from the zombie, as they were struggling, an immigrant from Dominica named Jeremiah DeWitt grabbed one of the officer's firearms and shot the ghoul in the head, killing it. Before he was placed in criminal court, all his charges were acquitted on the claims that it was all act of self-defense. The clothes of the zombies could be traced back to Middle Eastern and North African descent, though it's still unclear exactly where it came from. The incident itself became a local celebrity hotspot known as the St. Thomas Zombie, where various merchandise are being sold to this day, and tourists from all over the world frequently visiting the spot of the incident. DeWitt left for a new life in the States, to which his friends and family have not heard from him since. And that, my viewers, that is the conclusion of part 1 of the first episode for the history and lore. I originally wanted to do all the parts, the entirety of like the Zombie Survival Guide, World War Z, and all of its continuity into one video, but I realized that would have been way too long, and that would have taken way too long. I figured it was just better if I just divided it up into parts, just for like getting a steady flow of it going, and to make sure there's little errors possible, because that's just too much to handle all in one go. But stay tuned for the next part. We'll be covering World War Z the book, and then the third part we're going to be covering the movie along with the book. Along with the video game and the mobile app, since they're canon to the Multiverse. And so I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoyed the effort I put into it. I put my heart and soul into this video. Obviously, it's not perfect, and any criticism you guys have with it, I welcome it with all of my heart. I want to make it as the best version as possibly can for this series. And that'll be all. So thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you all later. Peace out.